Welcome to the Joyosity Podcast. I am so excited that you are here with us today. Whether you are a seasoned leader or you are just starting out, this is the place for you. And so if you are new or just need a good reminder of why we're here, we base all of our work here on three bedrock beliefs. One is that everything about leadership is about connecting as genuine humans. That's who we are. It's way more than just surface level strategies. Two, we need curiosity. Curiosity is how we start to create positive culture with all of those complex people that you work with, because that is all that we have to work with. And three, joy is the heartbeat of a healthy leader and a healthy organization. So we're putting it front and center all the time. And every week we bring you dynamic conversations with great leaders and experts who are sharing their hard-won wisdom, top research, and real life experience, so you can be a better leader yourself. So I'm Jen Whitmer, your host, international speaker, leadership consultant, all-around joy bringer, and guiding us along the way to go from these ideas that happen in your earbuds, in your car, all the way to your boardroom and your dining room. That is what we want for you, that you are taking these and applying them in your life. So get yourself ready. You have multiple beverages. I am in a different location today, so I sadly only have one glass of water that has disappeared. Here it is. And we are in our In Case You Missed It episode, reviewing the month with my favorite Shelby. And there she is.
Hello, got my multiple beverages.
You have
for
yours.
You.
I have my sad water.
Hello, happy October.
Yes, happy October. So we are reviewing this month. We've been talking about the connection of joy at work and our values. And we had the fantabulous, oh my gosh, Ken Black for 3 whole conversations this month. And as I have been, sending emails to people, reminding them of the podcast and kind of summarizing them, it keeps coming up all over the month. And I'm just curious how that's happened for you.
I loved Ken.
I know you just want to hug him too.
I felt like he's like that coach figure. Like, so I played basketball throughout, like, I love basketball. He, to me, would be like the perfect coach because he's got the empathy, but he's also got like the kick in the pants that you need, kind of.
Yes.
And I loved, like, he was just like, almost like that idea he shared about like knowing other people's values, you hold them accountable to their values.
Yes.
To make them the people that they want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Which that idea to me was like super, that was a good one for me, because I was like, it's not, if we know other people's values, it's not rude then to be like, hey, this is kind of outside of your values. Like, this is uncharacteristic, or like something I'm seeing that maybe isn't aligning. Like, that's where I was like, he would be the best coach or the best leader, because he's going to hold you accountable, but he's so kind. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I thought he did a really good job of like talking about values in a way that was motivating, I guess is the word I would use.
He kept bringing it back to the idea of lenses. And I thought that was so powerful. And it kind of messed with my brain a little bit, because I talk about the Enneagram as a personality tool, as lenses and the way that you see the world. And then it like clicked for me, because I talk about your Enneagram lenses, you cannot change them. Suzanne Stabile says you can't change the way you see, but you can change what you do with the way that you see. Yep. And so I always talk about that, like, you can't change those lenses. And then the stories that we tell ourselves, our mindset, are the meaning that we make from all that information we get through the way that we see. And we can't always control the thoughts that come through our brain, but we can change them. So we can change our thoughts, and over time we think differently, and that's mindset work. And then values are the way that you want to see the world, that you get to choose. And I was like, oh, that's why they're lenses. Like, it all of a sudden just clicked for me that, like, it's the values. I always say values are the way that you want to live in the world, but the lenses are also the way you want to see the world. It was a good click for me of like, oh, that is the progression I've always talked about in a different way. So in the backpack analogy of it being, Ken talking about sometimes values are heavy in the backpack. It just feels like you drag it all with you, versus lenses, these light lenses, and I get to choose what I need right now. And we joked about having old eyes. Where are my glasses? They're over here somewhere. Oh yeah. I've got my reading glasses, and these are my travel ones because they're not as strong as the ones I keep at my desk that are technically bifocals. So we get to pick which ones we need in the moment too, which I also thought was such a great way to talk about values as lenses.
And I loved what he said, about how did he word it? So, like, if you abandon your values or
Mm.
you choose, like, I think he used a personal example, and for me, that resonates a little bit more where it's like, maybe your family wants to do something and you don't wanna do something because of your values, of what you deem important, but you kind of being like, "Oh, it's fine," breeds resentment. I can't remember how he
Mhm.
said that or how he said that
Yeah.
story, but the idea that, like, those values and, like, saying, like, "Oh, it's fine," to things that don't align with you is actually doing a disservice to, like, your relationships. Because
Yes.
if you're like, "Hey, you know what? I actually think we should do it this way because XYZ," and you can articulate it, which I think is the I think
That
that's
is key.
the important piece,
Yes, yes.
about how that can actually help with your relationships, both, like, in your family and on your team,
Mhm.
of not abandoning yourself, being true to yourself and your own values, so that future conflict or future situations, like, everybody sees you better, right?
Yes.
And knows you better, so that
Yeah.
in the future, it could be an awkward, hard conversation like Jen talks about, um, today, but you're not gonna have the same awkward, uncomfortable thing multiple times moving forward, you know?
Yes. It was like sometimes it's pick your hard,
Yeah.
and so you're picking the hard initially, and it seems huge, when
Yes.
actually it's kinda like a road. Like, it's a really hard to drive on a gravel road for a long amount of time. Like, it's uncomfortable, it's dusty, your car gets like, it's really uncomfortable. So one time paving it feels like, "Oh my gosh, this is so much work," but
Yeah.
it's so much smoother, when you get further down the road. And, yeah,
Well,
talk
one
about
thing that just popped in my head about that is, so my husband, he is really bad about, like, correcting people, like, if they say something like, here's an example, his mom used to give him chocolate in his Easter basket. Years and years and years, she gave him chocolate, and it was, like, when he was, like, I don't know, his teenage years, he was like, "Mom, I don't like chocolate." He had been hiding the chocolate, like, all his life because he didn't like chocolate, and finally and she was like, "I've been giving you chocolate for years and years and years, like, you could have just told me initially," but because it was, like, so much more awkward when, like, it came out that he actually doesn't like chocolate,
Yeah,
so
for years, like,
yeah.
there's there's in Friends, because I'm old, there's this line and Monica's like, "You don't know me at all."
Yeah.
So just internally, that's what
Mhm.
you're feeling too. And, you don't feel seen or known, and also people aren't mind readers.
Yeah.
Like, you need to tell them, "Here is who I am and why I want to be this way," and especially if you're going through change. I think one of the things that's been really hard for me moving from being an educator and a school leader that had a pretty clearly defined job. Even if people didn't understand what a director of assessment and feedback was, I could tell them it's like an assistant principal job. And they're like, oh, okay, I get it. Like they understood a little bit more about what I did. And so I spoke in my hometown in Kansas City a couple weeks ago, and on the Kansas side, and I got to speak. It was so much fun to just be in my hometown. And my parents came, which was just really special because they've never come to hear me speak. And I'm kind of like, I think they know a little bit more about what I do, maybe just a little bit, but it's really, and it's hard to feel unseen like
Yeah.
that. And I had to realize they can't read my mind. They
Yes.
can't just figure out what it is. I have to tell them, here is what's happening, here's what I do. And it's the same with our values. Here's what I'm doing and the why. Here's why this matters. Is people can't see that. And because they're going to add their own story. They're going to add their own story. And our negativity bias as humans are going to be like, and it's going to be self-centered. They're
Yeah.
not going to just we're all working on assuming the best. But just in general, people are going to fill the space with a story that is negative and focused on them.
Well, and I've seen that a lot, like, the filling of the spaces, like, there's, like, big question marks, and this month I have seen huge question marks
Huge.
in my community, and the people are filling those with their own answers, and it's
Mhm.
so funny because once it's the values thing too, and it's the communication piece. Once you get more information, you go like, "Oh, yikes." Like, definitely shouldn't have just jumped to that assumption. So how do we, like, in your opinion, like, how do we fill those blanks on our team? Or how do we
Mm.
get people to give us the goods? Like, how do we pull out the values from our team?
Yeah, I think it's such a great question because it leads to the idea of you ask questions. Like, how do I do this? Oh, I ask questions. And I mean, Ken talked a little bit about this, about the power of curiosity. And I obviously, as curiosity being one of my values, which we talked about in this last episode, the third one, what my values were and the specificity and why the specificity of
Yeah,
values mattered.
love that.
And so being curious about somebody and also I think taking the time. So on your team, taking the time to get to know somebody, onboarding often is controlled by HR and you're supposed to have a one-on-one and some people use that as a time to tell people and orient them to the team and the work. And I
Mhm.
always think it's more powerful when you orient them to the person. Like tell me more about who you are and what's exciting about this job to you and what are the things that align with you if they've never done their value. You can ask like, how does this align with who you want to be as a person or in your values? If they've never thought about that, you might have to spend some more time, like encourage them in that way. But um, with that time to get to know somebody and really see them, I think you're going to get further in that initial conversation. But like that old adage that the best time to plant a tree was yesterday and the next best time was today, or 10 years ago and the next best time is today. So if you haven't done that on your team yet, there's nothing to stop you from doing it now. Like
I
just
loved
asking
I
questions.
Yeah, and I loved Ken's, like, point about how, like, your career changes, but, like,
Mhm.
if you know your values, like, as your career changes, it doesn't feel as scary, and it doesn't
Yes.
feel as, like, overwhelming. If you know your values and you know the company you're working with no longer aligns with those values, really
Mhm.
doesn't take a whole lot to know you need to leave, right?
Yeah.
Or to know you can make changes in certain ways, which
Mhm.
I thought was really powerful. And I loved just how he was like talking about how early on in your career, like, you like, because I've always thought of like, I'll figure my values out if I start a company. Then I did. And I was like, oh, like, I was supposed to do that. Like,
Yeah.
okay. And now I'm like, especially with like your work and being a part of your team, it's like, oh, no, like, it's not like this is like, "Oh, here's what Sunshine Lane needs." Like, these are Sunshine Lane values. No, it's like Shelby has her own values, Caitlin has her own values, and we can know if we know each other,
Mhm.
as the leader, can assign work a whole lot better if I
Yeah.
know, like, the different values on my team, which that,
Mhm.
like, light bulb went on with Ken's conversation where it was like, as a leader, you can lead better knowing your team's values, not just your own values, because I knew that was
Totally.
important, but your
Mhm.
teammates' values,
Yeah.
which I thought was cool.
And there's so many different ways to do it. I mean, Ken gave us some really great questions in that episode, and I work with people. So the Joyosity Retreat that's coming up in a week, working through values, we're spending like hours to kind of dig in. But it's like identifying them is the first step. But then they become, like we joked at the beginning, the whole beginning of the conversation, they become a word on the wall. In fact,
Yeah,
I had a speaking event this week where I walked into this organization and they had one of those motivational posters on the wall. It said integrity, and it made me giggle. And I
we
didn't say
love
anything
that,
because
yeah,
I'm sure one of their values is actually integrity
right,
because of the organization I was coming to speak at. Actually, I know that it is, but it still
yes,
just made me giggle.
yeah,
and but you have to get them off of the wall and into practice. So, like the practice you just named, which is helping people work more productively, which is part of the job of a leader, is helpful if you know someone's values. But you have to also look at, well, what does it look like when I'm living my values? How does that show up, and creating stories around that? Because just saying a word, when I say the word valor, people are like, "Oh, that's kind of a fun word,"
I love that word. Yeah.
they're a little intrigued,
I,
but
like,
then
put
what
my suit of armor on. That's what
yeah,
I always think
you do, you kinda wanna, like, move
Yeah.
forward with your shoulders. But what does that really mean when I get a difficult email from a client? Now what does valor mean? And how do I operate based on that? That's the key piece that what I love about what we're doing at the retreat, but also anybody who is listening that you have to figure out too. You can't just like, "Oh yeah, I named my values. They're great." What does
You
it
have to live
mean?
that.
You have to live
That's the
them.
hard part.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Totally. When you I was thinking about so if you're new to me and Shelby, Shelby is my chief gen officer and runs our team and she also has other clients, but also lives in East Tennessee and has experienced the wrath of and aftermath of Hurricane Helene and that filling of the story
Mhm.
thing I think is really powerful and I think with that and us approaching the election our values really, really matter.
Yeah,
And there is no perfect don't misunderstand me here, friends. There is no perfect alignment between your values and any party that exists in the world. So, like, don't misunderstand me. But if I'm going to live by my values, what do I assume about the people who potentially disagree with me
yeah.
that I hear on the news or that come up in a Facebook feed or an Instagram feed or a family text message group. Like if I'm going to live by my values of valor and connection, I mean, how
And
does that
curiosity.
and curiosity,
Yeah.
how does that show up? And so I'm curious for you as you have experienced some tragedy when it's so easy to fill in blanks. How has that shown up for you this month?
Okay, gonna make me a little emotional for some
Okay,
reason.
sorry.
It's
We can
okay.
move on.
Nope, nope,
No?
it's good.
Okay.
I wanna talk about it. It's super important. It has been incredible to see people in my community who are like this politically. Like, we've seen the Facebook posts for years. We know how you feel. We know how you feel. But to see everybody work together, the values are still there, even if you're in, like you say, like, political parties. Friends, like, let's be honest, like, there's
Mm,
nothing is perfect about our political system right now,
no.
and it's been incredible to see people who have such opposing, views working together
Mhm.
and putting our community first
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, and there has been ugly things, and there have and will continue to be just because I think we've reached the point in this, disaster where we're tired, and the
Oh,
communication breakdown is huge.
mhm.
It's huge in our community right now, but what me, Shelby, is trying to do is, when I try to fill those blanks in with negativity,
Mhm.
I'm actually trying to catch myself and being like, "Who can I ask questions to fill in this blank space?" Instead of assuming or jumping on the Facebook trend of like, "Here's how we all feel about it because we're all on this side, whatever."
Right?
Um, instead of doing that, I'm trying to, like, fill in those blanks thoughtfully and on purpose. Um,
Mhm.
and that's been huge as I've just been able to go and talk to different people because there's people I personally have not wanted to have a relationship with in our community, but then sought out answers to questions that I had with them that filled in blanks that made me less hateful is
Mhm.
honestly the word, right? Because I started, "Oh, that's why you think that way. I
Mhm.
can totally see how you're like this big," like so many rumors flying around.
Mm.
How this rumor started, there's truth. And there's always like a little line of truth where you start to see
The nugget. Yeah.
why people are scared. That's
Mhm.
a big, big
Always.
thing right now for everybody, I think, is fear, can kind of drive those. But, again, when it comes back to that idea of like, "Okay, what are our values?" And like, it's important for us to take care of our people in our community. That I think as a community, like we're all on the same page, like people who have lost their homes, people who are without heat, people who are, struggling to make ends meet just because like all of our food in our fridge is gone,
Right, yeah.
right? And so there's several people in our community who their house wasn't lost, but they're in hard times because their
Mhm.
food's gone, right? And, like, all the different pieces to that, but I think that seeing and reminding myself, like, there's a lot of, like, miscommunication happening right now, a
Mhm.
lot of tired people, but the heart of people is good. I really
Mhm.
genuinely believe that everybody in our situation right now has been trying their very best to be the very best person that they can, and sometimes it's not great when you're tired, but they're
Yeah.
they're still trying, and, I don't know, I just think as a whole, like, I'm not even talking about our community here in East Tennessee, the entire country, the entire world. Like, I have had people reach out from across the Atlantic Ocean, like,
Mhm.
checking on me, checking on my people, and, I've actually felt so much love and support this month. I
Yeah.
have, despite it being chaotic, to
Yeah,
say
well, there's no other word to describe it is
yeah,
chaos, and it is tragic, it is traumatic, it's all of those things, those aren't untrue words, and I think when it can be really easy when we're here, in our little podcast, uh,
mhm.
uh, I'm throwing my glasses, in our little podcast,
Yep,
studio-ish parents' basement, it's fine,
yeah,
to kind of talk about things in theory
yeah,
and talk about ideas, which I love talking about ideas. But what I love about the things that we talk about when we say the three bedrock beliefs, um, is that we can't control what happens on the outside. We cannot control the weather. We cannot
yep.
control somebody else, a boss
Yes,
that seemed great and then is now not great. We can't control our company getting sold. I can't control my neighbor moving out and a new neighbor moving in. I can't control any of those things. And that is, to use that cliche, when the rubber meets the road, how do I wanna choose to see the world?
yeah,
How do I wanna choose to see that? Because the values one of the things Ken talked about really early on is that we don't know where we're going in life.
mhm,
Like, we kinda think that we do, but we
yeah.
actually don't. We cannot predict what's gonna happen to us. And our values are anchor points that help us when there is chaos everywhere else.
Okay, and I love that because one thing that I saw, so early days, like, we lost power. We had no connection to the outside
Mm,
world because when my power goes out, my Wi-Fi goes out, which means my cell phone goes out, and
mm,
also all the cell phone towers went down. So,
mm.
chaos, right? And we would go down into town to get, like, updates on what roads are open and let my mother-in-law know we're alive and good. And we could only get down the road a little bit. We couldn't
Mhm.
get out of our community.
Yeah.
Um, and so but the cool thing about immediately after is people jumped in immediately. Was it
Mhm.
perfect? No. Was it organized? Absolutely not. It was so not organized. And everybody and I remember I showed up to, the volunteer space, and I was trying to find who was in charge. I quickly realized nobody was in charge. There is nobody in charge here. So, I was like, "Alright, like, I have to decide what the need is and fill it. And is it wrong? Like, did I totally unpackage all these toothbrushes that I shouldn't have? Yes, I did." But it was like the whole for me, one of my values that showed up is I need to do something.
Mhm.
I can't just sit around knowing there's people that need things. Um, and so, like, it wasn't perfect. It was messy. It was,
Yeah.
you know, but everybody that showed up to that space,
Mhm.
they just were there to help. They were there to do something.
Right.
Was it always helpful? No. Sometimes some of us did things that were not helpful, but I think that for me, taking away from this whole experience is just that, like, inaction is a decision, and action
Mhm.
is a decision, and owning up to the piece of, like, if I make a wrong decision as a leader, as a mom,
Mhm.
I have to own that decision.
Sure.
But I also have to own my inaction as well. So
Mhm.
if I choose to make a decision and it's the wrong decision, I have to own up to that, and I also have to own up to being scared of not making a decision.
Yeah.
And for me, I would rather try my very best to do the right thing, and if it's wrong, and own
Mhm.
it,
Yeah.
than not do anything, you know what I mean? And, I saw that a lot, and I appreciated a lot when people were like, "Hey, you know what? I was wrong about this." And I've seen so many leaders in our community say, "Hey, you know what? I had an idea about this that was incorrect. Let me just clear that up." And whenever I see somebody do that, I'm like, "Okay, you're my person." Like,
Yes.
I will
Yes.
follow you. You made a mistake. You
Mhm.
spoke about the mistake, like,
Yep.
you owned it, and now I'm like, "'Kay, whatever that woman needs, that's who I'm helping."
Yeah.
Like, it made it very clear. Values were so churches there's a church that I will be going to thanks to this experience because it was a day, and they had hot showers and hot food for everybody,
Mhm.
and I had been on the fence about a couple churches, and I'm like, "That's the one. That's where I'm
Mhm.
going," because it was just like that, and then there was small businesses that I will support with all that I can, you know what I mean? Because it was
Yeah.
like, I saw what they did in this moment, and I was like, "Okay," and sometimes it wasn't the right thing that they did, like, now that we're, like, a little bit of ways, we're like, "Oh, yeah, that's probably not, like, the most efficient way for us to do that," but they did what they could, and
Yeah.
it's just so interesting how these types of situations bring that out, and
Mhm.
it's okay.
Yeah, well, and what I love about what you're saying is, first of all, the leaders who are like, "I had an idea about this and I wanna clear that up," or, "I've changed my mind. Can we please normalize getting new information and changing our minds?"
Yes.
But what you're describing is the amplification of stuff we do every single day. Tragedy, trauma just amplifies what's already there. What's already there. And so
Mhm.
if you're listening, you're like, "Yeah, but I'm not in a tragic situation. I'm just kind of in this job." It's already there.
Yeah.
Your values are there, your organization's values are there, your leaders' values are there, and doing the work beforehand, and I'm, like, trying really hard not to, like, bring Shelby back to some coaching moments from, like, 4
No,
years ago.
but you need to, but seriously. Yeah.
'Cause I'm
Jen
like, on this podcast, I'm like, "Maybe not right now," but because she did the work 4 years
Yes.
ago, now this brought what some people are gonna be mad when I say this, actually joy
Yeah.
in the midst of great difficulty, and when I say real joy has deep roots, that's what I mean.
Well,
That's what
and, like, just a tiny little snippet from our coaching thing that I will bring up is the "what is mine to do?" That
yeah.
was just over and over in my brain because I wanted to do it all, and I wanted to help every single person, and at one point, I was running groceries to an older woman in my community, and my son had a meltdown, and I went, "What is mine to do? My
Mhm.
child. My child is who needs my help."
Mhm.
And it was really hard for me because I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna drop off these groceries, and today I'm gonna have to spend the afternoon with my son and
Mhm.
make sure he feels safe," because what I had not realized is that little boy had been through so much, and I had just been, like, in, like, help mode, you know? Like, "I need to
Mhm.
go help, help, help." I'm an Enneagram 2 for all our Enneagram people. And
If you weren't aware.
what I realized in that moment that "what is mine to do" came up, and I went, "Oh, I can still be helpful.
Mhm.
But I also need to focus on what is meant to do. It
Mhm.
doesn't have to be one or the other, but I definitely need to take care of my little one
Mhm.
for today, and I can get back to helping later. And
Mhm.
that was huge for me, so thank
Yeah.
you, Jen, for
Yeah.
having that little nugget in my brain because I wouldn't have it without you,
Well,
and I
but
was
you
like,
did
"Okay."
the work of
Yeah,
the rest of it too. So it's
yeah,
and also I think what you also did well during this time, and I for people who are helpers, you're like, "But my value is to help."
yeah,
You can't do that if you don't care for yourself too. So, like, you
yes,
also were like, "You know what? I think I need sleep."
yep,
Like, I need to put this down for a moment. I need a shower. I need to
yeah,
sleep. I should probably eat some food. Like those kinds of things which again, a tragedy amplifies that. So you might
exactly.
not do that every day because you're helping all the other people, but you have to care for yourself in that too. It's like our values aren't against us. Like we also have to use our values for us to
Yeah,
care for us. Otherwise, we can't do all the other things we want to do anyway.
yeah,
So,
yes.
oh, friend,
I know.
who was listening?
Thank
We
you.
got we got real deep there for a little while. Good.
But
Not
it wasn't there's no way to have this conversation without that, just with how this idea from Ken had shown up all month for me. It
yeah.
it was just so deep.
Yeah.
in this experience that I've had is just how amplified other people's values were, how amplified mine were, and
Mhm.
how knowing myself and knowing what's important to me, showed up this
Yeah.
month. And it showed up big, friends. It showed up.
It sure does. And I'm just gonna bring it back again. If you think like, well, that's not happening, there are people going through trauma and tragedy in your office right now.
Yeah,
It might not just be on the scale of a
yeah,
hurricane throughout multiple counties in the Appalachia.
yeah.
But did I say that right? Did I do
You
okay?
said it right,
Okay,
Appalachia,
good.
yep, we're
After I said it, I got real nervous there. Like it's happening for
Yeah,
people in your work. And so taking the time to identify your values, either we'll put in the show notes how to identify your values. I have a free download for you. Coming to the retreat, hopping on a Spark call with me to see if that's something you want to do, but do it before you feel like you need it, because you already need it. You just might not feel like you need it right now.
yeah.
Do it
And you
before.
already have them. I loved that point that you and
Yes.
Ken talked about. Like,
Yeah,
you
you
already
already
have
have them.
values, we just need to kinda unearth
Yeah.
them, kind of
Yeah.
figure them out. Yeah.
I was on planes, trains, and automobiles everywhere this month.
Mhm, I know.
And yesterday on the train, I was like digging through. I'm like, I know my AirPods are in this backpack. Like I know they are in here. And values are
Right.
like that too. Like I know that they are there, but you have to do a little digging to put your hands on them.
Yeah.
And then you have to
Can
name them and
organize
all
them.
that kind of stuff and
Mhm.
organize them and
Put
put
them
them
at
in
the
their
top of the
proper
purse so we can
Put them in the proper packet, not the other ones. Anyway,
Yes.
that's a story for another day. But,
Yeah.
well, as
No.
listeners, we are so grateful that you are with us, which if you take time to rate and subscribe, especially about values, I think this month has been really meaningful and timely. I would love to hear your responses and share them with us because
And
it's
your values. I love to hear other people's values because
me
I
too.
don't sometimes I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that is one." Like, I wouldn't have I don't know, come
I
up with
love
it.
that too. Yeah, share it with us. You can connect with both Shelby and me on LinkedIn.
Yes,
We're
please.
around all the time over there, and we're just glad that you're here listening. So thanks, everybody. So let me put my coach hat on for just a moment. Don't just leave this here. Take a moment. What did you learn? What's your next tiny action step? Share this episode with someone and tell them what you're going to do. Check the show notes for all the links and connect with us on LinkedIn and all the other socials, or just, drop me an email at Jen with 2 N's at jenwhitmer.com. We want to keep this conversation going with you. I know your earballs have a lot coming at them, so thank you for listening to the Joyosity podcast and being a part of our community. Please take a moment to rate and subscribe. It helps more people join us in the movement to create positive culture with complex people. So work is a joy, people are whole, and organizations flourish. Can't wait for you to join us next week.